G'day everyone, welcome to the Outback Packers podcast, the podcast where two mates from all the way across the world have a yarn talking Packers football and the green and gold. I'm Nick Gregory with my co-host Joe Pearson, as always, today joined by host of GameOn Wisconsin's Quick Slants podcast, Jason Perone. So Jason's coming on a little bit later in the podcast. Before he comes on, me and Joe are going to do a bit of catching up and talking about the cornerback position this episode, kind of previewing what's maybe not as much of a super urgent need, but I think it's always really important to have heaps of depth in the secondary, and with guys like Keyshawn Nixon being free agents and Rasul Douglas possibly playing in his last year with the team, it's still very important to kind of develop this position and have guys in the depth chart and ready to go for the years in the future.
Right. And like I've said in past episodes, the Packers always seem to take at a position a year before they need it, then take it after they already know they need it. So, it's always good to look at some of these positions, and, there's going to be question marks with the secondary no matter what. Coaching changes, position changes, stuff like that. Like we talked about in the safety episode, there's only like one safety or two safeties on the roster. Kind of CBs, we have a little bit more on the roster, but there's some question marks after, basically your 1 and 2. We know Jair's there. We know Rasul's there. We know Stokes is going to be coming back from the ACL at some. Well, actually, we don't quite know what his complete knee injury was. They just said it was a knee and ankle injury, and it put him out. So we don't even. Right. We don't even know how severe it was. So we just all kind of assumed it was an ACL. So he could be back this year. He could be not back this year. So, I mean, it's definitely – and then after that, you got Shamar Jean-Charles, who was another question mark throughout the year. So, it definitely we like to say it's not a pressing need, but it is still kind of a need.
Yeah, and if you think about so if the Packers played tomorrow, you have Jair Alexander, maybe Eric Stokes, Rasul Douglas is playing. We don't have really a slot corner. We have Shamar, but he still hasn't really shown a heap. It's really we have good starters, which seems to be the case with a lot of positions on this team, but next man up, it's actually kind of a little bit scary. If we have another injury to one of our starters, we have those top three guys, but even in the slot, we don't really have much proven or reliable depth. So I think to me, the priority is getting someone to kind of, play Joe Barry's star role, or that kind of the nickel slot inside. Someone who can be there full time as their position, because we've seen that the coaching staff really doesn't want to play Jair inside full time. So I think that for me, that would be kind of the priority in the later rounds, maybe somewhere like as early as round 3, but ideally around 4 or 5, you can find, a decent contributor inside. That's kind of what I would be looking for if I was in the GM seat there. How do you feel kind of about like our depth going into this season?
No third rounders. I'm firm belief we trade all third round draft picks from now until doomsday.
Definitely fair.
I mean, it wouldn't, to be fair, it would not surprise me if they went corner in the first round, just because nobody's really prepared for it. And it would just be such the Packer thing to take something people aren't prepared for that position to be taken. And who knows, with all the talent in this draft, not just with the corners, but like the edge rushers and, somewhat of the offensive line and stuff like that, one of the top tier corners could fall right into the Packers' lap. So it wouldn't surprise me, but I would say, earliest need-wise, earliest probably second round, but I think you could probably get some depth the guys 4th, 5th round. Like I said, I'm not even going to look at the 3rd round. They just need to do away. We go from 2, jump 3, and go to 4. So that's where I'm kind of sitting at. I mean, it's also going to be a position that they potentially could nab a Rasul type guy out of the free agency, one that's not going to cost a ton of money, but's going to come in and have an impact. Maybe not on the Razul level impact, but still have somewhat of an impact there. So
Yeah.
yeah, I like I said, it would not surprise me if the Packers to pull something off like that.
And luckily, as it is with a lot of the positions that we've kind of gone into here, there's a really defined kind of blue chip first class kind of tier, and a lot of the guys underneath that, it's really a bit of a like pick your poison kind of scenario. There's a lot of really physically gifted corners in this class, and a lot of guys who were somewhat ball hawks or like good producers in college, but their transition to the next level is kind of projected to be not very like super direct is what I'm saying. Like I think that value across a lot of positions from round 2, round 3, round 4, there's so much to choose from, and I think it's going to be almost guaranteed that people are going to be getting steals or whatever in the 5th and 6th round. This purely based on guys kind of falling out of the mix, and I don't think that the Packers should necessarily be targeting someone unless they really have fallen in love with a guy who can be a versatile defender early on. But yeah, the good news for them is that if they trade down or if they want to, use one of those cursed third round picks, there should be, a pretty good range of people. It's not like you're gunning for that one corner who's going to be good and there's a severe drop off. I think there is quite quite a vast middle tier to this draft with the corner position.
And we are recording this before the combine hits, so the combine's going to do a lot of work. It's going to
Mm.
drop some stock, it's going to raise some stock, so we don't know until actually that happens that what who's going to be where and who's going to be what. I mean, there's some guys that if you look at the tape, you'll be like, oh well, that guy's kind of slow, that guy, but then he's going to go to the 40 and or I mean to the combine and run like a 4.240, and everybody's going to be in love with him. And
Hmm.
we've seen it happen many a time where, oh well, this guy's a star, this guy's a star, and then he goes to the combine and he just completely tanks everything,
Hmm.
and then he falls clear out of somewhat the draft. And also you got to go with the meetings and everything where stuff kind of starts coming out. I mean, who knows, we could have another gas mask bong that knocks a guy out of the top 10. So it's that's why I kind of love draft season, is because of all the changing opinions. One minute they love this guy, and the next minute he's in the doghouse, or one minute they really hate this guy, and the next minute he's the favorite. And
Yeah.
yeah, that's why I love this time of year.
Yeah, and you see guys like my favorite example from last year was Tariq Woolen, and a guy who'd only played corner for 1 year in his life. He was a wide receiver convert and just an absolute physical freak on all levels. And one of the most gifted athletes ever at the cornerback position, but he just had no experience. And his first year in the NFL managed to put it all together. And I don't think we've still seen the finished product of Tariq Woolen, but even as a rookie, I mean, my God, he was already a top 10, top 15 type defender. So, it's at the end of the day with the draft, it's about projecting to the next level. It's not about what they did in college or, if you can kind of get by in college. You really need to see the kind of progression and the physical traits, like they don't matter until they do, as we always say, it's a threshold thing. They need to have a level of like requisite athleticism to compete in the NFL because you're not going to have that advantage over other people unless you're like, a 95th percentile athlete. You're not going to have that advantage over every other player like you might have in college. So it's really important kind of, that's why you see guys like Keely Ringo still so highly coveted because they have the NFL frame. And, guys like Devon Witherspoon, who are still very talented, will fall a little bit because they don't have, as large of a frame to kind of compete on the outside. When you're going up against receivers who are like 6'3", 6'4", over 210 pounds and really, really strong guys. And, sometimes you'll have to match up against tight ends. It's really difficult to live in that when you're like literally 40 to 50 pounds lighter than some of these guys.
I think corners, it's a little bit easier to get away with, not I'm not saying you want a 5'5" corner, but sometimes it's easier for a guy that's 5'9", 5'10" to play corner than it is to play receiver.
Mhm.
Because I mean, you still got the arm length in that, and yeah, some guys are going to tower over you, but it's not like you have to fight that guy to get the ball. All you got to do is make sure you knock him off his route, or get him out of position, or bat the ball away, or whatever, so he can't make the play. So, not saying corner's an easy position, but sometimes a smaller guy can play it better than what a bigger guy can do. But yeah, some of these guys, it, well, I mean, just take a look at Packer history. Micah Hyde, came in as a corner from Iowa, and you could tell he didn't quite have the speed to play corner. He still had some success at Green Bay, but he didn't really have his major successes until he made the switch to safety in Buffalo. So, sometimes that helps a guy making a position change. You mentioned Wolin. Well, look at Sam Shields, played wide
Yeah.
receiver, all his college career, and then made the transition, and he was a key piece to the Super Bowl team that year. Or Bobby Touchdowns was a quarterback in college, and he come into the NFL as a tight end, and so
Yeah. No,
sometimes
absolutely.
that happens. But and sometimes some guys' athletic profiles don't fit the position they're in. Devin Hester is one that he was a corner, but he had his physical attributes didn't really match what a corner would be, so that's why the Bears kind of wanted to move him as a wide receiver. Now that didn't really work for him too well, but that's the type of thing that can happen when you're running like a 4.2 40 and you're 6 foot 200 pound, and so it can happen, not all the time, but it can happen. And like I said, we'll find out more when the combine hits.
Yeah, and kind of the last thing that I want to say before we get into the actual draft prospects here, it's also cornerback is one of those positions where you can find really good special teamers. I think generally like secondary players are a really good source of that. You can find guys who are physical, are great open field tacklers, guys who can pursue and kind of beat blocks. You know, if yeah, if you have speed and that kind of aggression. I mean, look at a guy like Rudy Ford. He before he came to the Packers last year, he really had no safety experience or very very limited safety experience. But he made a living in the NFL as being a fantastic gunner. And if you can find someone like that in rounds, even like 5, 6, or 7 undrafted, if you can find these guys to contribute on special teams, a lot of them, will come from that cornerback position and can fill in limited time like Rudy Ford did. So I think, yeah, if you can bank on that athleticism and just like basic like football ability just to tackle and be willing and be one of those kind of Matt LaFleur guys, the guys who love to lunch pail hardworking guys. So if you can find one of those in the later rounds, I think it's quite an easy way to get value, especially with a lot of our Rich Pisaccia guys kind of departing, guys like Dalen Levitt and maybe Keyshawn Nixon.
Yeah, and what's funny is a lot of the guys that are playing special teams in the NFL didn't play special teams in college,
Yeah,
because in college there's more people, there's more players on a roster, so you can separate out your guys. Okay, these guys are going to be our special teams, these guys are going to be our defense, these guys are going to be our offense, and there's not really going to be a ton of crossover with it. But then when they hit the NFL, okay, well, you can play special teams, but what else can you do?
yeah,
And
yeah,
so a lot of guys flame out like that. So it's another one that really wasn't a great player on defense, but was a great special teamers. Going back to the Super Bowl team again, Jarrett Bush. I mean, I don't know how many people wanted him cut when he was playing defense, but when he was playing special teams, they loved him. So, it's I know they say football doesn't change, but when you hit the different levels, your expectations change. So like I said, 1 minute you could be playing special teams, the next minute you could be playing defense, or even Keyshawn Nixon said, he wanted to get out and try playing offense. So,
Yeah,
uh,
that would have been funny.
hey, I really think they'll try to re-sign him. It may not be it may not be an expensive uh contract, but it's going to be at least um enough to keep him around, because I don't think you could get rid of him, not with how well he turned around our special teams.
No, absolutely. Yeah, and yeah, he's one of the few free agents that I really want to see back on this team. So yeah, I'm happy to start getting into this draft if you want to.
Yeah, why don't you go ahead and give us who you uh like out of this draft class?
So we kind of just come off the back of this special teams conversation, and funnily enough, my favorite corner in this team in this draft class is also a special teams ace. So that's kind of probably the most important aspect of a good corner in day one. That's Devon Witherspoon out of Illinois. Really, really fun prospect to watch. I mean, if anyone watched that safety episode at the very start of the series, you guys know how much I love Sidney Brown out of Illinois as well. And watching his tape, it's so hard to not get distracted by watching Devon Witherspoon. I mean, this guy is just an absolute terror on the field. It's kind of like the poster boy or definition of playing with your hair on fire. And he's kind of somewhat limited by his frame. I think they had him down at 6 foot 180, and he'll probably measure in a little bit smaller than that. Even I'm not sure about weight, but he kind of seems a little bit on the shorter side of 6 foot. And I think because of that, he might fall down to that kind of 15 range. And if we are picking at 15, I would honestly not be mad at all. And especially with the value of kind of guys you have around there and how important nickel corner is in today's NFL, I would love to have him on the team. And you think about a guy who's, my comparison for him is like Jair Alexander. Jair himself is, undersized for the position, but it's never really mattered for him. And obviously against the really tall receivers, you kind of see it sometimes, but the tenacity, the ferocity, tackling ability to play both zone and man to an extremely high level. Devon Witherspoon has a sensational ability to click and close, that kind of almost like psychic ability to just know where the receivers are going and kind of break on their routes. And this, like, I mean, his production and stats kind of speak for themselves. He gave up only about 220 yards the whole season, and in man coverage all year, he only gave up one catch, which is absolutely insane. He is a hard worker by all accounts. I mean, he's one of the chirpiest guys in college football. This is a guy who came on as a 0-star recruit and started on special teams, and he kind of proved himself through special teams and worked his way up to being the best player on that defense. And it's just really fantastic to kind of see that. And you really, that kind of, like I said before, that linear progression, it's something that I can see with his tools, pending the testing and things like that. I can really see that translating to the next level. And, it'd be hard to see if he earns a full-time outside role like Jair has, but I think he's definitely capable of that. And purely skill-wise, I think he can absolutely thrive inside the box, but I think he'll play well enough to kind of earn him time outside of that. So that's my little rant about Devon Witherspoon. I absolutely loved watching him. Super entertaining.
Well, what's kind of funny is the site that I go to for just to look up names of guys to watch has Witherspoon listed as 6'1". So
Oh, right.
yeah. So I don't know. It's kind of funny that it changes where you're talking he's 6 foot, but it looks smaller, and now this site's saying he's 6'1".
Yeah.
Now they did kind of say a little bit what you said, where he's kind of undersized and underpowered to be a press corner. And he's thin with an extremely slight frame. So if he can put on weight and still keep his abilities, he should be. I mean, they still have him listed as their top corner, but I suppose you got to find fault with any little bit with him.
Yeah, I think he's one of those guys that if he was just 10 pounds heavier and like a very like definite like 6 foot kind of guy, I think he'll be talked about as like a top 5 pick in this class. He's just so incredibly talented, and you know that's kind of the difficult part, right? Is kind of evaluating how he's going to be, not only what he can do, but also how coaches will treat him at the next level. I would hate for him to go into a system where he just gets boxed into being a nickel corner and that's it, because he's capable of so much more. And again, like if that had happened to Jair Alexander and he never really got to play on the outside meaningfully, I mean, we'll be robbed of so much of his talent. Getting to see that on the field, I think, yeah, we'll see the testing. I don't think he's going to be like the best athlete in the universe, but I think he'll test very well. Yeah, we'll kind of see how that goes, but yeah, I think that I would love to have him on the Packers, and I think because of the size concerns that he will fall a little bit under a guy like Christian Gonzalez. So if we can get him at 15, like I said, I said this pre-show, I would prefer to have Devon Witherspoon at 15 than a guy like Michael Mayer or even like Brian Branch at 15.
Well, somebody I'll probably get into later with Jason, but I'll just kind of mention him here because I kind of think it's funny that the two guys that you just listed, Devin Witherspoon and Christian Gonzalez, this guy's ranked number 2, so he's behind Witherspoon and just before Gonzalez, but that's Joey Porter Jr. And he was a guy that I really liked. Yeah, I kind of watched a lot of that I really enjoyed seeing. So, but like I said earlier in the show, it would just make total sense that the Packers would go with an off the wall pick and pick a corner at 15, or even trade back and pick a corner. But because why not? Let's spend more first rounders on the defensive side of the ball. But yeah, I really didn't watch a lot of Witherspoon just because I knew that a lot of teams had him, or I mean, a lot of talking heads had him as a top pick. And what I like to do is kind of look at people who are going to be, your blue collar types later in the round, or that one diamond in the rough that, nobody else is paying attention to, but then all of a sudden you see him go in like the first or second round and everybody's like, what?
Well, so yeah, like, why not tell me a little bit about Joey Porter? I think I didn't like him as much as some other people, but I know that he was kind of your boy going into this evaluation.
Yeah, I totally butchered his name on Twitter, so I've been doing that a lot lately. One minute I called him Potter, the next minute I called him Jerry. Obviously, he's got the pedigree, but I thought he was like a more of a complete corner. He was physical off the line. I did say he could get a little bit grabby, but like we talked about with Mike Kawano in the safeties, sometimes they teach it, but sometimes it's a panic mode thing. He has good size. It looked like he had decent speed. He tracked the ball well. He had his moments where he was a decent tackler, and I said he was more of a press man cover than he was a zone guy, which, if you think about it, that's what the Packers tend to like is a press guy. So, I mean, I just really loved how he moved around and he flowed to the ball, and he pretty much stuck with his guy, and he had a great punch off the line. He was knocking receivers out of their routes, and like I said, I'm not gonna sit here and say, okay, well, he's going to be a first round guy. I try not to put rounds on people just because it's so hard to do. And when you actually get into the draft, the guy that I said could be a first rounder might end up a fifth rounder. The guy that I said was a fifth rounder is going to be a first rounder. So I really don't mess with rounds, but the site that I get these names from has him listed as the number 2 corner in this class.
Yeah. No, yeah, I it's hard because I didn't like him as much as some other guys that I saw in this class, but he's still incredibly talented. And if he built an outside corner in a lab, it would probably look a lot like Joey Porter Jr. I mean, he's not super like twitchy, I mean, he's still fast, and I'm sure he's going to test very well. But I think sometimes, like you said, he can get a bit grabby and maybe a little bit desperate at times when he kind of gets beaten like an inside release by some of these shiftier guys. But I don't think I ever saw him like panic and like lose it. He's still a very good corner, and his ability to kind of like squeeze guys on the sideline and like he's really long. So using those big arms and like you said, I think my favorite part about him was watching his press ability and his ability to just kind of like blanket these guys. Like guys running close to the sideline there. The X receiver. He's a real like alpha kind of guy. I think in the next level he might be a little bit kind of limited to more of a man coverage. Like I'd say limited, but let's say specialize in more of a kind of like what Russell Douglas kind of does for the team. A guy who will thrive in man on the outside there, and I think he definitely has a place doing that because he has the frame to compete at the next level. I think it wouldn't be my favorite pick for the Packers in the first round. I think he could be like somewhere in the 30s or early 40s. But yeah, I think he's very talented though. The physicality is the thing that jumps off the tape for me. He's just super aggressive, powerful, long guy.
Well, yeah, like I said, he did seem to get lost a little bit in the zone coverage stuff. I mean, it wasn't horrible, but I think he's the type of guy you put on an island and he's going to shut down that, it's going to be his island. And so, but then, like I said, he's got the pedigree. I mean, Joey Porter, long time in the NFL. So, if we can get that kind of career out of his son, then, hey, let's go for it.
Yeah, I'm still waiting on John Runyon to kind of fulfill his dad's shoes there, but
hey, we don't even want to go there because I think he's the unsung hero of that offensive line. I think he's been put in a tough spot because Myers hasn't lived up to his spot. And of course, he's got, maybe Nyman at right tackle or Zach Tom at right tackle or whoever at right tackle. So he's kind of sandwiched in between a couple of question marks, but I think he's held his own. So he may not be like superstar mode, but I don't think he's a slouch by any means.
Yeah, well, we'll talk about it on the O line episode, or maybe we have already talked about that on the O line episode, depending on when these come out.
We'll see.
So
we might bring it up every episode because you kind of irritated me with that comment.
Day 2, what are you thinking here? I think this is the range where you could actually see the Packers really kind of zone in on one of these guys. I have my kind of targets here, but like I said, this is such a big range of guys that you could really pick here on day 2 that it's kind of hard I found it really difficult for me to kind of project where a lot of these guys were going. I tried to reference myself with the Draft Network, the Pro Football Network, and PFF obviously, but they have them all ranked in different places. So I think it's really, really hard to project where these guys are going to go. I mean, on PFF, they have Eli Ricks out of Alabama as their number 3 corner, I think. And, like the Draft Network has him as like the 210th ranked prospect overall. So it's quite a hard kind of area to project. But who do you think is kind of that second tier for you?
Well, like I said a little bit ago, I it's hard for me to place a round on any pick. I can tell you guys I can tell you guys I've watched, but it's hard for me to say, okay, well, this is going to be a mid-round guy, this one's going to be a late-round guy. I can tell you a couple guys that I've looked at that may go in the second round, or I mean, in day 2. One of them's DJ Turner out of Michigan.
Yeah.
Like and him. One I know has some talk of maybe being a day 2 type guy, but I wasn't fond of him, was Emmanuel Forbes out of Texas A&M.
Yeah.
I wasn't overly fond with what I saw out of him.
I don't think the Packers are going to have him on their board at all.
Yeah, but I mean, like, well, I'll give the website. NFLDraftBuzz.com is where I go to get names. They have him ranked as their 8th corner.
Again, it's just with the frame. I think he's just so thin.
He's seems thin, like but what I really saw was he was slow. I didn't think he had great speed. He was a tackler. I watched him lay some hits on some guys. That was amazing. I'm trying to look here. I can't even read my own writing. Um, he needs to do a little bit more off the line. He just kind of did one of them little hand flap slaps and whatever. And he needed to keep the receiver more in front of him. He kept letting the receiver get too far behind him to where he would get lost and not know the receiver had already
Yeah.
done an out or done an in or whatever. So he needs to keep track of the receiver a little bit better. And that's pretty much what I said about him. But like I said, this site that I've been just pulling I don't follow what they say, rank
Yeah.
wise, but I just been pulling names off of them. But they have them listed as their eighth corner in this draft. So I went and looked, and I don't see it. But
Yeah.
now Turner out of Michigan, I thought was pretty good, and he could probably be a mid round guy.
Yeah, I really liked him. One of my favorite guys that I would actually really love on day two, again, one of these, slot types, for lack of a better term, that's Clark Phillips out of Utah. I just saw uh, for me, the thing that jumped out to me is just the movement skills. I mean, it seems like he can almost, teleport exactly where he needs to be. He can just super lightning fast, twitched up, oily hips, but still very talented. Very instinctual, and I think he had great hand usage. Not like not as kind of. I don't think he relied on his hands as a lot of other guys did. A lot of these corners, they kind of use the momentum of the receiver to kind of slingshot themselves out of the break to kind of help them make up for that. I thought he was a guy that was just so physically talented as a mover that he with a little bit more coaching and adjustment to the NFL, I think he could be basically a day one contributor in the slot. I really loved what I saw out of him. Super super sticky, great reaction speed. I think he again one of these guys who played outside in college, but I would have a tough time seeing that in the NFL because he is 5'10". He has, he's a big 5'10" at 185 pounds, but it's still difficult when you have, 2, 3, 4 inches less than these other receivers in the NFL. Like you said, I love DJ Turner. He was really great. One of these guys I want to talk about briefly here is Keely Ringo. I think he is kind of the player that the Packers would kind of love.
Another
This
Georgia
is
kid.
well, exactly. It's the pedigree, it's Georgia, it's the colossal frame. I mean, the guy is massive. You see it so often. The smaller receivers try to challenge him. You give him a little bit of a punch in the chest or try to get past him on the press, and he just like, what are you doing? Doesn't react. It's just I think he has all the tools to become a very high level corner at the next level. It's just hard because he was so inconsistent. Coming into this season, he had top 10 pick buzz. He was talked about in the same breath as guys like Christian Gonzalez is now, but he hasn't really put it all together on a consistent basis. I mean, you do see it. There is flashes, but just as easily, a couple snaps later, he'll totally whiff or he'll look lost. I think his ball skills weren't really ideal. He kind of gets too caught up in the receiver and he doesn't turn his head around very effectively. A little bit, because of his frame, a little bit high hipped. Not necessarily a stiff athlete, but I think his place is on the outside. Because he's so bulky and so muscular, I just think he kind of lost a little bit of that short area agility. But I think he is a guy that whether or not he gets drafted by the Packers, I think he is kind of their type physically and someone they would probably bank on being able to coach up. If they hadn't drafted Eric Stokes, just 2 years ago, I think he's a guy that they would be all over.
We kind of talked about this a little bit before recording. Um, I, I saw a little bit of Keeley, and yeah, I agree with a lot of what you said. But there was some chatter, and I don't remember who it was from or if there's any weight to it or not. But there was talk that he might be a better safety than corner in the league, and that could just be because of his size. That could just be because of maybe some of his lack ability at corner, but he could also be like a Charles Woodson type where he could play both and thrive, or just be that guy that you could throw all the, just be that jack of all trades that you throw out there and
Mm.
he roams the field. But I don't know. I know I'm going to use this as a crutch until the combine hits, but it's going to be a lot different when we see what happens at the combine. Kind of
Yeah.
like what we were joking with Mike Kawano during the safeties episode. Some guys that are listed at like 6'1", 6'2" on their college bio or this bio or this, ESPN bio, they go to the combine and they really measure like 5'10". They always want to make their players look bigger in
Hmm.
college than what they actually are. So it's going to be interesting what he kind of measures out to, and I think that would be more another indicator on whether or not he would move to safety, because we've had the 6'3" corner and it athletic corner, and it didn't seem to work out too well with Kevin King. He was 6'3", but he ran like a 4.3 40, and he passed all the agility markers in that. So, and I'm not saying this guy's another Kevin King. I'm just saying, we've had that experiment before, and you don't really see a ton of 6'3" corners in the league being majorly successful. You have guys that are, pretty good, whatever. But, maybe he tests out well, and it'd just be better off that he makes that move to safety. I don't know. They don't pay me millions of dollars to make those decisions. So I'm glad, in a way, I'm glad they don't, because I would hate to, go into a meeting with Brian Gutekunst and Matt LaFleur and say, yeah, this guy sucks. And then, so the Packers don't draft him, and then he goes on and has a Hall of Fame career.
Well, as someone who has Good's number, I am the Australian scout for the Packers, so I'll tell him that. I'll tell him
There you go. Make sure you get those
that.
Aussies. We'll get into this when we talk special teams, but Torrey Taylor for the win.
I kind of side note here. I know one player who played in college in the FCS, and that was for Kennesaw State.
Well, that
And
works.
I don't think he's on the roster anymore, to be honest. But he was, super physically talented, real lunch pail guy. I just think, he's a real diamond in the rough. You're like a 8th round pick kind of guy. No, it's hard. I think the only other, besides Jordan Mailata, who's probably already the best Australian player of all time, the only one I can think of is that guy, Adam Gotsis. I think he was drafted by the Broncos in the 2nd round or something like that. That was in 2015,
There's been a
2014.
there's been a few.
It's like
There
players who
was a
aren't punters.
Well, I was going to say there's a long time punter. Drew Bennett was from Australia.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, I know there was that kid. What year? How long ago was it? He was a rugby player that kind of
The one for
caught
the
on with a
Jets.
practice. Was it the Jets
Or
or
one,
was it the Eagles? He was a running back.
there was one with the Jets and one with the 49ers.
Maybe it was the 49ers. I can't think of what his. I want to say his first name was like Eric or something like that.
No, yeah, I forgot his name as well, but he was kind of a bit of a douchebag. I didn't really follow him too closely, and um, yeah, no, it's funny. Like, I think, just because I love Jordan Mailata, I just want to say, like, it's so nice to see him getting the success. I mean, I don't know if you know much about him, but he was drafted in the 6th round purely based on athletic traits. I mean, he had no
Yeah.
football experience. He had never played football until he started training for the draft, and drafted in the 6th round. That's absolutely insane. Drafted on his tape from another sport. Like that's it's incredible. And now he's the starting left tackle on the best offensive line in the league. It's
Well,
really that's only 4 years later. It's pretty impressive.
that's what those late round picks are for. I know the big talk was that kid from Germany. What was it, Moritz Boehringer or whatever it was? That
I thought you were talking about the guy who got drafted by the Patriots, Hjalte Froholt.
no. This guy was um what year was that? but his name was like Moritz Boring or something like that, and he played the German football league, and they had scouts over here talking, oh well, he could be, second round
Oh
pick,
yeah,
third round pick, and he ended up going like sixth or seventh round to the Vikings, and then he just kind of disappeared.
yeah. Okay, yeah, that's funny.
So
um. Anyway, back to the cornerbacks on the cornerback episode. um. One of these guys I thought was really interesting. That's Jatavius Martin, also out of Illinois. I know I'm kind of keeping up the theme
why
here of
don't you
loving
just
these
go back
Illinois
with
backs.
the Illinois? What the
So
hell, man?
Sydney Brown. I mean, no, I think Jatavius Martin. He's funny. I don't. I wouldn't like to draft him on day two. He's talented and he did good at the college level, but he's kind of like that prototypical like Raven Green type guy. He like it's really funny. He's a really funny evaluation because physically he's a bit of like an odd one out, and a lot of places have him listed as like a hybrid linebacker, which I don't see. He's too light for that, but the same way that they envisioned Raven Green to be the tight end eraser, presence in the run game, do some coverage stuff when asked to. Uh, I guess that kind of is like what the star is now, right? But I think he is like exactly what you kind of look for in that player. And I don't think he is like a high level prospect, but he does some nice things. He has great coverage ability. Yeah, he's physical. He's a very like passionate tackler, I guess you'd say. He has special teams experience as well. I don't think he's like super twitched up or whatever to be able to like dominate inside against like slot receivers, we'll say. But I think as someone who's like another person in the toolkit who has like a defined role, and the Packers have had trouble with tight ends for the past like a million years, so someone who could kind of help out with that problem, I think would be a fun pickup in like round 5, round 6. I mean, I don't see why not. I think he'll be a great addition.
I don't know. I think going forward, I'm not going to watch any Illinois players just because I know you're going to talk about them all. Uh, I mean, I see where you're getting at with it. So he'd be basically a guy that you would transition to more of a safety type than
Mm,
actually play the corner spot. Because that's theoretically what you kind of hope your star player or your
yeah,
slot guy is more of a safety corner hybrid. Uh, the guy that's the bigger build that can go against tight ends, but have the agility to be able to line up against a receiver if need be.
mhm,
So, I wouldn't be against it, but I think uh, as much as they like to talk about having that type of guy, I don't think that's the type of guy the Packers are going to take. You know what I mean? They're gonna
yeah,
they're gonna take somebody in what they want and then try to turn him into what they need. So they're gonna take the press corner with the agility and try to make him a slot corner.
yeah. No, I definitely get what you're saying, and we kind of joked about this pre-show that the Packers run such a zone heavy scheme under Joe Barry, and theoretically they should be coveting a lot of these kind of like ball hawking guys, but they seem to just like go after. I mean, Eric Stokes is a perfect example. He's a guy who thrived in man coverage when he has his hands on the receiver and uses he can dominate on the outside, and then you kind of you get him in the NFL, and then he's playing in one of the more predominant zone teams in the league. So it's just funny because at some point zone coverage does become man coverage. You still need to cover a player. You're not just covering the grass, but it is just quite funny in terms of like specialization or whatever. They choose to go for the skilled man covers and try to adapt them to their scheme.
Right, and kind of like we were talking before recording, which is funny that I said that Iowa plays more of a zone heavy defense. So a lot of their guys, when they come into the league, they really struggle to convert to that man type rule, which I think really hurt the Josh Jackson pick, and then Nick saying we run more of a zone. And it's like, yeah,
Yeah.
but it's also a lot of man heavy too. So that's what a lot of these guys struggle with is, they're super good at one aspect, but they're not so good at the other. And then they get to a Packers team that mixes in both pretty equally, and they struggle with doing one or the other.
Yeah. Is there any guys that you want to kind of address on day three? Maybe your boy Riley Moss.
I think Moss could sneak into the day two depending on where how he tests.
Really?
Yeah, because I mean he's got all the skills that you really want out of uh, a corner in the league. Um, I mean there are some issues with him, and I imagine somebody who doesn't have the Iowa bias and has a better eye for stuff would be able to point it out. But I said he mirrored receivers well. He has good speed. He's definitely a willing tackler. He did look a little bit stiff in his back pedal. Uh, there were moments that he could get lost in coverage where, okay, well, I think my spot's over here, but really it's over there. And, he had some of those moments. And like I wrote down and like I just said, Iowa DBs tend to play a lot more zone. So they kind of struggle when they get into the league and have to play a little bit more man than they're used to.
Yeah.
But I watched him, but I tried to not make so many notes about him just because I do have that bias where I don't like to see a Hawkeye player not succeed in the league.
I imagine you're still pretty hurt about Josh Jackson.
I still think he was screwed up by a lot of things. One, he was put in a situation where he had a trouble learning it. And then if you remember right, I think they went, that wasn't that like the end of Capers, beginning of Patton? So he
Yeah,
had
I think it was
two
the first
separate,
Patton year.
yeah. So, and then, he had to switch over and learn a different system. And I think there's a lot of things that screwed him up, and it screwed his confidence up that he just couldn't overcome it. And which sucks,
And yeah,
but it happens.
and I think this the really weird thing to me was that they really tried to push him into being a slot corner as well, which is just like the absolute opposite of really what he should have been doing, in my opinion.
It was the foot speed thing. It was the same thing as Micah's. He was this highly touted corner, and he's going to be a first or second rounder, or he's going to be a first rounder, he's going to be a first rounder, and then he went to the combine and ran like a 4.59, and maybe he doesn't have the speed to keep up with a guy on the outside, so let's put him in the slot because he's still got good size and agility. And like I said, sometimes that just doesn't work. You can't put a guy in a position
Yeah.
that he's never played before.
Yeah. Um, One of these guys I thought was a really interesting evaluation was Garrett Williams out of Syracuse. I thought he, you know, he tore his ACL 7 games into the season. Brutal. I think if he wasn't injured, he would have been talked about as like that kind of 6 to 10 range of cornerbacks, if not higher. He was super talented. My notes here I have, like fantastic ability to kind of read and react in off coverage, zone coverage. Really like natural mover. A great ability to play the ball. I thought he had, he showed a good ability to get his head around when the ball's in the air, kind of read the quarterback and attack, and not just always just reacting based on what's happening like to him or around him. I think that he will test pretty well. It's just hard to see, well, I say test as if he's going to be at the combine. He's still, not that long off an ACL, so it's a hard evaluation for any team. I don't see him going anywhere before day 3. But as purely, as this kind of like lottery ticket guy, he's a guy that I think, could possibly transition to safety or, contribute in like a very zone heavy scheme like we run. I like his ability. He's not just limited to being as this kind of like floating zone defender. He's still physical. He can still tackle well. Um, it's just hard to project coming off that injury how much it affects his athleticism. But I'll be happy with him on day 3. I guess kind of the last ones I want to bring up here is like a guy like Tyreek Stevenson out of Miami. Pretty impressive frame, but I think he kind of projects more of like a core special teamer. Guys to replace like someone like a Dalen Levitt. I think he could be kind of that kind of role, fill in as a special teamer, and on the defense when needed in limited snaps. And I like Jalen Jones out of Texas A&M. He was good, pretty consistent. He had issues staying healthy, but I think he, almost like an Adrian Amos in the way that not gonna dominate and take over a game, but he just did his job. He did it well, and I don't think there was ever a point where he was like a liability. I think he has the ability to be like a solid backup corner in the league, and he has he has plenty of tools to work with, and he's younger than I am, which is actually scary to think about. Um, he has plenty of time.
I've passed that point a long time ago.
He's still got like Mercedes Lewis and Aaron Rodgers.
Yeah, sure. Thanks. Well, no, not Tom Brady. Remember, he just retired.
Well, yeah. But I think he's one of those guys that could kind of eventually develop into a starting corner, but I think could easily contribute. I think he's intelligent enough to slot into a scheme, and not necessarily straight away as like a number 2, like I said, but with a little bit more development, could eventually become something more. I would love to take a flyer on a guy like that a bit later on. Maybe early as round 4.
When Rich Bisaccia was hired, I can't remember which one of the beat writers said it, but they kind of had hoped that they would do with him what some other team did with one of their special team guys, where they would say, all right, Rich, we're going to give you this pick specifically. You tell us who you want for special teams. And I kind of hope they do that where, okay, we've got they've got like 4 7th-round picks.
Yeah. Yeah.
They can say, all right, Rich, pick, round 7, pick whatever. This one's yours. Who do you want for special teams? And maybe it could be one of the guys you just mentioned. Maybe it could be somebody else. Hell, Donahue's only on 1 more year. So it could be a punter for all they know. And I know cutting him, even though I don't want him cut because he played pretty well this past season, but if they were to get somebody that could beat him out in training camp, that would save a little bit on cap space. So, I kind of hope that happens with one of the 7th round if they don't trade them all. I mean, knowing them, they'll package all 4 7th rounders and move up to like the 5th round or whatever. But if they don't, then I would hope that they say, all right, Rich, you can have unless he gets signed by, the Colts as their head coach or whatever at this point, whatever the rumors are.
Yeah, I hope not.
I hope not either. I said if Jim Irsay would steal away Rich Bisaccia, I would personally drive to his house and punch him in the face.
So for the next segment, guys, due to some scheduling issues, I wasn't able to be present, but Jason and Joe both did a fantastic job, and they're happy to take it away for the next section.
Good day, everyone. I know this is kind of a little bit weird. I'm in charge here. I'm here talking with GameOn Wisconsin's host of Quick Slants podcast, Jason Perone. We're going to talk a little bit about the cornerback position. Jason, it's great to have you on. When we were talking about getting guests on, you were one of the first ones that Nick wanted. And so I made it happen. Unfortunately, we couldn't get you during the season just because of scheduling, but now we have you here. It's great to have you on.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for having me on. I'm so sorry I was one of the first ones that came to mind. That's my self-deprecating joke, but no, I appreciate it. Love the show. Thrilled to be on and talk a little draft.
Well, when I announced who our guests were going to be for the upcoming draft episodes, you were the one that everybody seemed to come out and pick on and talk about your handsomeness and stuff like that. So I was looking forward to it.
With my face for radio. No, I really appreciate that. Way too kind. Way too kind. If you ask our Game On Wisconsin overlord Jacob Westendorf, though, he'll knock me down a peg, and he keeps everything on the honest there. But no, I mean it's good. I mean, unfortunately, here we are close to the Super Bowl, and there's no Packers football. So obviously, we wish that there was a game to be talking about rather than draft stuff. But so we sit. I guess we should be used to this by now. 12 years later,
Yeah.
right?
Well, and unfortunately, the only news coming out right now is still the Rodgers drama, and I don't know about you, but I'm getting a little tired of it. I'm ready for it to all be done. Trade him, keep him, whatever. Just just keep it. Just do something.
Yeah. There's a lot going on. The darkness retreat. I mean, he never leaves us without something to talk about. So I guess as content creators, we can be happy about that.
Yeah, no kidding. We could probably just do a podcast just on his outside of football stuff. I mean, I guess if he really wants to go lock himself in a dark room for 4 days, who am I to tell him any different? But
I was doing Pack-A-Day because I'm on Pack-A-Day podcast as well, and with Mark Eckel on the Thursday show. And Mark asked me on this latest show, it was funny. He said, "Do you think there's a possibility that Aaron Rodgers is just messing with all of us? Like none of this is actually going to happen, and he's just trying to do this to get a reaction, and there's none of this is actually going on." And he and McAfee and AJ Hawk are like, "Hey, what can we come up with that sounds realistic and sounds on brand for you?" Because Aaron Rodgers, like you said, he's an interesting guy, right? He leads us to believe that he's this, and he is this very unique. I'll use the word unique. I know Mark Murphy called him a complicated fella. He's a unique personality. So it's almost like no matter what he comes out with, it's hard to question that it might be true, right?
Well, yeah, I mean, and it's not like he's got paparazzi following him everywhere that, we could actually find pictures of him in these dark rooms or on his shroom trips or, and who's really going to go check the bathroom after he has these so-called cleanses and whatever. Yeah, but I agree. He's probably, from day one, he's always been a guy who's kind of messed with the media. And he's always loved drama. I mean, look at one of the, after he was drafted by the Packers, one of the audio clips was, the 49ers are going to regret not taking me pretty much, so from day one, that's the type of guy he's been. And I could see him messing with us, but I could also, on the other hand, I could also see him being the type of guy who would go lock himself away for 4 days in a blackout room. And
well, if that's really what he's doing, if that's really what he ends up doing, there's no better way to say, hey, you can't tell me that I didn't put some deep thought into my decision.
Right. But we could talk about Rodgers for hours and hours, and that's not what we're here for this episode. We are here discussing the cornerback room of the Green Bay Packers. Now, this episode will be coming out sometime later than what we're recording, but the news of right now is they have signed Greg Williams to be the new defensive back coach for the Green Bay Packers. I know he's not. I just was kind of reading an article where he's kind of an out of left field type name to fill in the position. And I do know that I did see a couple quips about him in Arizona the last couple years that they've been top 10 in pass DVOA. So I mean, if they can bring that kind of thing to the Packers, that'd be great. I do hate losing Jerry Gray because I did think he was a solid coach and he was a solid guy to have on the coaching staff because he had the DC experience that if he needed to, he could step up and be that guy. But what do you think of the Packers signing Greg Williams as the new DB coach?
Yeah, I don't really know much about him other than he's probably very glad to be getting out of Arizona and away from the Cardinals. If anyone follows me for any length of time, I'm in Phoenix, and the Cardinals are not my favorite team in the NFL or in any professional sport. So I think we rescued Greg Williams from Arizona, but they had to bring somebody in, and I guess Jerry Gray left on some interesting terms there, right? This last season, he said some
Right.
very
Yep.
pointed things about his feelings, and you could just kind of tell it didn't seem like maybe the connection with he and Joe Barry was very strong. And now he's moved on and he's in Atlanta and moved on to the Falcons, and so the Packers got to bring somebody else in here. And the interesting thing is a lot of the defensive problems seem to be communication, and a lot of it was on the back end. So we'll see if Greg Williams can help fix that. He's a little bit younger than Jerry Gray. I mean, he's in his mid 40s. I don't know how old Jerry Gray is, but I think he's a little bit older than that. So maybe he'll have a better opportunity to connect with some of these young players, fresh voice. I don't know much, I don't know much else besides that. I don't know what your take was when you heard. I mean, wasn't somebody that I really knew of. There were a lot of names thrown around, but I think Packers fans were more geared in on, hey, are they going to make a change at defensive coordinator? And Matt LaFleur obviously opted not to do that. Joe Barry is going to be the guy, at least as far as we know today in 2023.
Honestly, when I heard the Greg Williams name, he wasn't the one that I was thinking of. For some reason, in my mind, I was thinking of Bounty Gate.
The other Greg Williams. Yeah.
And so I was like, wait a minute, they just signed Bounty Gate to be the defensive back coach of the Packers? What a weird way to transition from Jerry Gray to this other guy. But then when I got to looking, I was like, no, that's not the same guy. So other than the real quick tweets that I saw about them having the top 10 past DVOA, I really don't know anything about him. But to your point about the whole Jerry Gray situation, yeah, I thought that was kind of interesting that he finally got fed up and just told his guys, go out there and do your job. Don't worry about scheme. Just go out and do you. And it seemed like they were actually succeeding more when they did that than beforehand. And that's kind of telling that, maybe the Joe Barry system isn't working like it should be. And it's also kind of telling that maybe LaFleur needs somebody in his ear to help with the personnel side of things. Maybe he needs somebody telling him, all right, I know you're friends with Joe Barry and he's a good guy and everything, but maybe you need to cut ties with him and bring somebody else in. So it's going to be interesting this next year. I did kind of make a prediction. Well, not prediction, but I did kind of make a thing. And when Nick and I talked to Mike Kawano about the safeties, that this would be a good way for them to kind of integrate Brian Leonard Jim Leonard into things and maybe bring him in as a defensive back coach, and that could help him get used to the NFL game. And then if they do move on from Joe Barry, then he could slot in as the defensive coordinator if they thought he would be a good one. But obviously that's not happening. So I'm like most fans that, or the fan side of me. I guess now I could consider myself a little bit of the media side because we are doing the Packer podcast. So I've got to keep a little bit separate than whatever. But the fan side of me would have said cut ties with Joe Barry immediately after hearing what Jerry Gray was talking about. But the media side of me knows that I know LaFleur is going to do his thing and he's going to bring in who he wants because he wants control. But it sounds like he's losing control more than he is keeping control.
Well, what's interesting about that is Mark made a good point was you don't want to keep switching coaches. If you keep changing defensive coordinators, then no one wants to come work for you because they're like, well, I'm going to be here for a year and then I'm going to get scapegoated. And they've changed special teams coaches 3 times, finally hit on Bisaccia. Hopefully he sticks around. He's got some interest.
Right. Yeah.
So the defensive coordinator, when you're talking about somebody running your offense or your defense, that's a big move to make. And I think Packers fans also were hoping that, Evero became available and some of these other candidates that the Packers might pounce on that. But I don't think you make a change just because someone else is available. I mean, if you're gonna stick with your guy, you're gonna stick with your guy. So we'll see what Barry ends up doing. We have to hope as fans that it works out. I know that we're all dubious about it because, but the other interesting thing too is that Joe Barry just gets all the smoke right now when the offense had plenty of its own issues. And
Yes.
there was a lot to want for on offense as well, and that led to, you know, a lot of that was led by the quarterback having a subpar season and not playing as well. There's all sorts of different things. Listen, my big thing is, listen, it starts at the top. So Matt LaFleur is the one in charge, and everything kind of filters down from there. So Barry's got to have the defense ready. Stenovich is going to have the offense ready, and Matt LaFleur runs the entire ship. So ultimately, it starts at the top. I mean, I get, and I guess to transition it over, because I know we want to talk about some draft stuff here.
Yep.
Then you've got Brian Gutekunst that's in there as well. And I know that back when Ted Thompson was there, they had silo issues and communication problems, and they had that weird structure where Mike McCarthy didn't report to Brian Gutekunst. It was to Mark Murphy, even though you had a GM. So just a really, really interesting offseason in Green Bay. And it's got some shades of 2008, but hopefully it does not get to that level.
Yeah, that's my fear too. And I just, like I said, I'm ready for it to be done with. You know, let's get it done. And I've been kind of joking around on Twitter and our newfound Facebook page that, you know, what would be really interesting is if they traded both Rodgers and Love, just to see how fans would have a meltdown.
Trade and then elevate their, his name's escaping me, our practice. yeah the preseason darling from last year. All right, that's one way to go, I guess.
No, what we would do is bring back fan favorite Kurt Benkert and let him run the show. But no, I just joked that, you know, take all the picks you can get, trade them all, and, you know, just redraft everybody.
yeah, absolutely.
But
definitely.
As you said, you know, we are here to talk a little bit more about the draft side of things. I do want to kind of get your impressions on what you think of the current state of the cornerbacks are on the roster. Obviously, you know, we've got the starters in Jair and we got the starter in Rasul. Eric Stokes is dealing with some kind of injury, which we're not sure of exactly what it was. You know, they kept saying it was a knee and an ankle, and nobody's ever really come out and said exactly what the injury was, but we all assumed it was an ACL. But you would think that he eventually comes back too. Is he going to be the same as year one? Is he going to be a shadow of year two? But what is your take of the cornerback position on the Packers roster as of right now?
Well, it's a little thin. I mean, they have starters. I mean, Jair Alexander obviously is your stud corner, had a big pick six in the Pro Bowl, which is flag football now. It's about time they did something exciting with that. But then you've got Eric Stokes, like you said, who's injured, and we'll have to monitor his progress and if he's going to be ready or when he'll be ready to come back and play this next season. And then Russell Douglas, who they signed to the extension after he was really good for them in 21 and then again in 2022. Shamar Jean-Charles couldn't seem to get on the field that much. And then the only other cornerback right now currently that's under contract is Keandre Thomas, and he didn't play at all. So
yeah,
they're going to need, you know, they're going to need some depth at that position there at some point. You got special teamers and some guys that might fill in on a special teams role. But as far as your starters, you know, this isn't really a position that jumps off the page as far as we're talking about early in the draft, because everyone wants to know who the first round pick is going to be, the early picks are going to be. And then there's also some thoughts of maybe the Packers will have some additional capital to work with, depending on what happens with certain players and situations, the Rodgers situation too. So if they've got multiple picks, it's a premium position. So it's one that if the Packers want to fortify, you kind of need to use some early draft capital if you want to get somebody good. If you look at all the really good corners around the league, not many of them came out of the fifth round and shocked the heck out of us. This is a position where typically if they're really good, like Sauce Gardner, for example, you know, and if you look at some of the best cornerbacks in history, Jair was a first round pick, right, Marcus Lattimore back in the day, some of those guys too, just, you know, Denzel Ward comes to mind as well. They're all early picks. If you want a really good corner, then you got to pick one early. The Packers may not necessarily be in a situation where they're desperate or they have to add some talent. But if Eric Stokes has a setback or he's not going to be ready, maybe they do go that route. Now, they've got a lot of other needs, and Goody typically tends to go defense early in the first round. Love is the only offensive first-round pick I think that he's made. So, and last year, they added a linebacker, Quay Walker. They added a defensive lineman. So corners on defense, it could potentially be something. I don't know if it would be a round one concern. So it's like they've got their starters, but they need some depth.
Yeah, I was just telling Nick that it would be the Packer thing to come from left field and take a corner in the first round. We're all expecting them to do something else, and corner will be the guy that they'll take. But I agree with everything you said. I like I was telling Nick, I do feel the corner is at. I put our needs in tiers. So like tier 1, I would think edge, safety, tight end are in that tier 1. Tier 2 would be your corner, maybe your receiver, maybe your offensive line type thing. And then of course you got your tier 3, tier 4, which can vary depending on what they are. So again, we don't know what the Stokes injury was to know, all right, well, he's going to be ready for training camp. He's not going to be ready until week 6. He's not going to be ready till then. Maybe are we going to have another Bakhtiari where he's not going to play for 2 years, type thing. Knock on wood, that doesn't happen because he was a promising player. He did struggle a little bit in year 2, but, a lot of guys do struggle in that second year. But just looking at the free agent pool, I know Nick's got some names down here on our show notes, but is there anybody from like the free agent pool that you would think would fill a spot to maybe be the next Rasul Douglas to come in on a cheap contract and, get some meaningful snaps?
If I look through the list, I don't really see anything that pops out right now where I'm like, "Ooh, that would be really attractive," because some of these guys are probably going to be a little bit more expensive.
Right. Yeah.
I think Eli Apple's a free agent now. He's kind of a lightning rod player. You either love him or you don't. He plays with a certain style. He definitely says some really interesting things. Byron Murphy in Arizona.
Yeah.
He's only 25 years old, and if they're not going to, and I think he's finally an unrestricted free agent. If they're not going to bring him back, that's a young player that if they like, they could bring him in. If you want to run it back, and if the Vikings decide that they don't have room for Chandon Sullivan anymore, he knows this defense. He's going to be 27. He knows the Packers. He knows the defense and the team. So that could be an option there too. Now, one other free agent, Joe, I guess I should mention probably the most attractive free agent of all that we haven't even mentioned is a guy by the name of Keyshawn Nixon, who I think the Packers absolutely need to bring back. And obviously if they do, it would be more for his kick returning abilities, but
right, yeah.
He can get in there and play a corner, and you need a little dog at corner, and he definitely brings that too. So if you bring him back, then you're in pretty good shape. I don't think you have to reach, and then you can even add some depth in the later rounds. The Packers have quite a few picks, so they can add some depth in the later rounds and take a flyer and get some special teams, and then pretty soon that position's looking pretty good.
So you're saying he's a Mog?
It could be. Yeah. Is that right? Yeah.
Sorry, Brian Maffey told me I needed to sprinkle some Spaceballs reference in there, and that was just the perfect time to do it.
No shortage of that. I don't think Brian and I have exchanged one single tweet thread that did not have a Spaceballs gift in it. So, and half of your audience is just tuned out because they're like, I don't even know what that is. It's some movie from back in the late '80s that was a Star Wars spoof that was awesome back in the day. But if you watch it now, it's painfully. I mean, obviously, movies have come a long way with the technology, but it was actually pretty funny even for back then too.
Hey man, we're still waiting for that sequel.
Yeah. Oh God, really? Well, before Mel Brooks is gone, let's try to get that thing done, right?
Right. But yeah, that hey, you set me up perfect though, and I don't think you even knew you were going to. But yeah, Keyshawn's definitely got to be a re-sign. The big question mark is, what kind of money is it going to take to bring him back? Is somebody going to do the Desmond Howard thing where they're just going to throw a bunch of money at him to come in to be their returner, or is he going to want to be returner / corner and he wants the playing time on both ends? Or like Nick and I were kind of joking, he was talking about how he wanted to play some offense too. So, is he going to go somewhere that's going to let him play all three phases of the game? So, but I definitely agree. He's definitely got to be a must sign. And again, it's all going to depend on money and what the situation is and all that stuff. So,
Yeah, I mean, you also have two. I mean, you've got some older guys out there. I mean, I don't think the Packers want to get older. I think they're definitely wanting to get a little bit younger. I think Patrick Peterson's a free agent, but I don't know what he offers at this point. I
right,
mean,
yeah.
Marcus Peters is another one. Bradley Roby's he's actually over 30. I keep thinking he's still a young guy, but
It's
he's
crazy. I think
yeah.
the same thing. But I remember when he was drafted too. So but like I give Nick crap all the time. Nick's 21 and I'm 36, going on 37. So, all these guys are young guys to me anymore.
Right, absolutely. Well, and again, if you ask Jacob over at GameOn, God and I went to school together, so we were in the same middle school class.
Well, I'm getting close there, buddy. So we're working there. But one that you mentioned that would be interesting, considering we just signed as DB coach, would be Byron Murphy. Would he want to come to Green Bay to follow, the coach that put him in a scheme to have success? I do know the one thing on him coming out. I do remember the one thing coming on out of him during the draft was just maybe his foot speed wasn't there. But it's like anybody else. You can, if you scheme it right, you can put anybody in to make it work. So I don't think the money's there to go out and get a big name. I know Nick's got like Jamel Dean and Isaiah Oliver and guys like that on here. I don't think there's money to do that, and we're already paying enough money to some top guys already. But just some depth guys, maybe an older guy that wants one last run, or maybe somebody who's just looking to make a name to get that next big contract. But, now to make the kind of transition, let's go ahead and jump into some draft talk. I know we were both saying that, or you were talking that you don't really delve into the draft too much, but, surely you've got some guys that you're kind of interested in the Packers taking. We did this, Nick and I did a whole separate part to the show earlier because we kind of had a scheduling conflict with Nick. But he was talking about how he liked Devin Witherspoon out of Illinois and Cam Phillips out of Utah and guys like that. Is there anybody who jumps out to you from this draft class that you would say, hey, I want this guy. He needs to be a Packer right now?
Well, so that's interesting. It kind of goes back to what I was saying was, if someone's going to be my guy, they're going to be the guy, which means they're probably going to be picked before Green Bay picks. It's just the way life goes in Green Bay. They're not going to be available. So everyone's like, oh, I want Christian Gonzalez. I want Joey Porter Jr. Well, so do I. And if the Packers have some draft capital, like, so for example, if they end up with that 7th pick and they're able to hang on to 15, if they don't have to trade 15, which I don't know how that would work, but let's say that they had both of those. Now you're definitely looking at the possibility of getting one of those top guys. Maybe a Witherspoon is available when you pick it at that point. And I think you go with the best player that you have and you figure it out afterwards. Like if you're like, oh, well, you don't need that position, it doesn't matter. You pick the best player and figure it out. Just, you can't have too many good football players on your team. So I guess I'm hoping that Green Bay maybe looks for some more help up front, like on the defensive line and the edge group and corner. So for corner, we're looking at more of like the middle rounds, like Jalen Jones at Texas A&M. I like some of what he brings. Rick's from Alabama. I mean, Ringo in Georgia. I'm a big school guy too. So if you play at Alabama, automatically you move up a couple of pegs, right, in the pecking order there. But don't know a whole lot about their game. Now, DJ Turner is really intriguing to me because he just he can run out of the gym. Yes. And so he's got a lot of speed, and it seems like the Packers have really focused and gone to that more speed requirement. I know they have the height requirement, the RAS and the measurables, but those are a couple of guys I think. I mean, the Packers are going to have a shot at one of them. So if they want to get better, they're definitely going to have an opportunity. And like I said too, if they end up having multiple first round picks, that's a premium position. It would make sense to go there.
I agree. And it, like I kind of said earlier, it wouldn't surprise me that if with the Packers, if one of these guys fell to 15, that they would just say, all right, we're taking him, because that's just the Packer way. They've done that with, it seems like every pick that they've had under Gutekunst, it's been, all right, well, this guy fell to us, we're just going to go ahead and take him. Obviously, with the Watson thing, it didn't happen quite like that. He fell to a spot they were able to move to, But, usually, Gutekunst has been the type that, hey, this guy's here. His, like you said, the RAS score is there. His measurables are there. We're just going to go ahead and take him. I think that's where they kind of got in trouble with the Jordan Love pick in 2020 is, he met all the thresholds and he met all that. They didn't get the guy they wanted, but he was there anyway, so they just went ahead and took him. Now, I do have some notes on Turner because he was a guy that I really kind of liked too. Like you said, he had tremendous speed, and he's got good size. He looked fluid. His hip flip looked fluid.
Mhm,
He
mhm.
tracked the ball well. I thought he could be a little bit more physical. I think he needs to, if they put him in a press man situation, he needs to be able to, really pop the uh, receiver a little bit more. Not like anything major, but it was a little. You always got to find one or two little things to pick on a guy about.
I,
Um, I thought I didn't think his back pedal was the greatest, but that could be a teachable thing, a mechanism thing, whatever. He did mirror the receiver pretty good. I would not turn him down in the second round if that's where they had to take him. I do see him maybe third, fourth round, depending on uh, what his combine turns out to be. Although I have said the Packers are no longer able to make third round picks, they just need to trade
really,
all picks. And,
Jeez.
as a part owner, I put that in stone. No more third round picks for you guys. You just need to trade them all. But
Can the
I
Packers
did.
the Packers throw in a third round pick and they just send that third round pick to the Nets for Jay Crowder and just say, hey, you know what? Here's all the Nets second round picks, and the Packers are going to give you a third round pick too for Jay Crowder. Just get rid of the damn thing. It's been so bad. But no, I mean, I know we've to kind of stick on Turner for a minute there. Somebody is going to get enamored with his speed. I think he made
Yeah.
a list of like all freak team because of his speed. Somebody's going to get enamored with his speed, and he strikes me as somebody that could end up being like the first pick on day 2, just simply because he's so quick. But here's the thing: he doesn't play the run very well. The
Right.
Packers already have a bunch of guys that don't play the run very well. And listen, as a corner, that's not something. I think that's kind of a luxury. It's not really something that you ask your corners to do. But there are some good willing tacklers in this class.
Oh yeah.
And I think the Packers could find somebody a little bit more physical if they wanted. But it just depends on what they're looking for or what they think they need. I mean, you got to also take into consideration what the NFC North presents to them, right? So the Vikings have Justin Jefferson. The Bears or the Lions have Amon-Ra St. Brown. So those are guys you're going to see twice a year. Jameson Williams. So those are guys you're going to see twice a year. So listen, what do we need to do 6 games a year in order to compete? And it might be worth saying, hey, we're going to sacrifice a little physicality for speed because we're going to get killed by our own division if we don't have the right guy.
Right.
defending.
Yeah. Oh yeah, I completely agree on that. And I think you were talking about how you're a big school guy. I think that's the best thing that's come out of having Gutekunst as the GM is he's been looking everywhere for prospects. Whereas it seemed like with Ted Thompson, he only picked from specific conferences. He never really delved into too much. I mean, he did occasionally. He did the haha pick. He did stuff like that, but for the most part, it was like Pac-10, Big Ten, those type of conferences. He didn't really delve into the Alabamas, the Georgias, the places like that. So it was really good to see Gutekunst kind of maneuver around and say, all right, these guys are producing stars. Let's go ahead and take one before we miss out. So, and I know Nick has some guys down here, like you mentioned Eli Ricks and Keely Ringo. Those are solid guys. Nick and I were kind of talking before that I'd seen somewhere, and I don't know if it was on Twitter, I don't know if it was somebody's evaluation or whatever, but Ringo could be a guy that maybe slots in as a safety more than a corner, which might fit with the Packers better because he could be a hybrid in both ways, and they kind of like that hybrid situation. We want you to play slot, we want you to play this, so that could be a guy that they'd take. It's unfortunately Al Davis isn't with us anymore. Otherwise, DJ Turner would probably be the number 1 pick overall.
He'd go third overall or something. Yeah, the seventh overall, and he'd be out of the league in 2 or 3 years. Because all he's doing is just running out of the gym. I don't forget Brian Gutekunst obviously loves Georgia athletes, so Ringo could certainly be Ringo, and that's kind of the sweet spot of where I think. Because here's the deal, if you need to address corner, you're not going to do it in the 4th round or below. If you're taking flyers on guys, that's fine. But if you want to make an impact and you want to get a corner that's going to be able to do something for you either this year or next year, you got to grab one before the end of the 3rd round. And we know that the Packers are 3rd round picks are illegal from this point forward in Green Bay, right? So it's going to have to be in round 2. And I think that could be the sweet spot where Green Bay goes and fortifies and gets a corner, because they're going to have to decide. I mean, how long do they keep Rasul? Are they going to let him play out his contract? Stokes has a couple more years on his rookie deal. Then they're going to have to decide what to do with him. Yep. And it's a position that's getting very expensive. They've got the highest paid corner in the league right now. Like you said, they're throwing a lot of money at it. So this might be a way that they fortify the group and say, hey, we're getting an impact rookie that comes in, but you're not going to do it, like I said, in those later rounds. You got to do it earlier.
And like Nick kind of brought up earlier in our discussion, there's a whole talk about Rasul being transitioned to safety. So is he going to stay at corner? Is he going to move to safety? What's going to happen there? Is he even going to be on the team? Nick has been saying that maybe this is his last year with Green Bay, period. So, it's all going to depend on that. And like I've talked before, the Packers always try to take at a position a year before they need it. So, like this year, it's not really a need for a corner, but maybe next year or the year after, it's going to be a need, and they kind of fill those spots, a year or two in advance. So, that could be a situation too. Now, to kind of jump on your saying that you need to take these guys and first set, you're not going to get them in later rounds. There are chances you get, the odd guy in the 5th or 6th round that comes in and is a starter. Now, Nick has some guys listed here, but there's one guy that I did notes on that I don't see listed. And I'm going to preference this again, that I do my notes. I'm not a professional by any means on scouting or anything, but I also don't like to set rounds on guys because I'm not that good at it. I could say this guy is an automatic 1st rounder, but, other guys are saying, oh, he's a 5th round guy. What the hell are you talking about? So I'm not going to put a round on him, but I will say he gets the 1st round draft pick in the name category because it's a really funky name. And I hope I don't screw it up too much. It's Kyu Blu Kelly. He's a cornerback out of Stanford. It's spelled Kyu Blu Blu Kelly. And he's out of Stanford. And, I really liked what I saw out of him. I think he might be slimmer framed. So, the big issue is he going to be able to hold up? But, he pretty much stuck to his assignment like glue. He was a little bit choppy in his back pedal, but, he stayed pretty low in it. And, he looked good, had good hip flip. I thought he could work on his awareness a little bit. There were times like the ball was thrown to his left, or the play was going to his left, but he was still running with his receiver to the right. Little bit things there. I mean, it's good that he's still stuck with his receiver, but all right, the ball's already been on the move. You need to start moving towards, it goes back to high school. You said you played a little bit of high school. I played a little bit of high school. The coaches always told you, make sure you go to the ball. When the ball's in play, go to the ball. Again, little bit nitpicky thing. It's good that he was still with his receivers, so if anything happened, but whatever. He was a good tackler. He was laying some form tackles on guys, and like you said earlier, you want that in a guy, considering we don't already have that.
Mm-hmm.
I said he might not have top-notch speed, but he still had workable speed. And again, we're not going to be able to know much about it until he gets to the combine and they do, to see what his straight line speed. He had solid press ability. He had a solid punch off the line. He was knocking guys out off their route. I said he had good size. He's, I struggled writing this, so I'm struggled talking about it. He has good size, but he doesn't play to that size.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
He played a little bit smaller. So I wish he was a little bit more physical in his type of play for the size that he is. I think he was listed at like 6'2" or something like that. And of course, like I joke with Nick and that, colleges put these players' sizes 3 times bigger than what they actually are.
Oh
So,
yeah.
their 6'2" might be our 5'10". And but I think he could be a mid to late round guy that could take a flyer. I just love the name, period.
Yeah, the all name team, right? Well, so I guess one guy that stood out to me that might be a later round or mid round guy too is from Kansas State, Julius Brents.
Yes.
And he reminded me of Kevin King, 6'4", 200 pounds, tall, thin, like the measurables. And then they said, as far as his build, there's comparisons to Sauce Gardner. I always chuckle, when we talk about, like, you see these comparisons to these players, and I'm like, okay, he's, you're calling him Sauce Gardner, isn't even played in the NFL yet. We're talking about a potential rookie of the year type of player there.
Right. Yeah.
But I guess I said, hey, the Packers had that guy, and how did it really go with Kevin King? I mean, King had a good season in 2019, but outside of that, and then of course he's forever chastised because the Packers didn't take TJ Watt. But if he is so there's the size. He meets that qualification for Goody. Goody likes the size, right? But Brents has been a more willing tackler and run support. So I wonder if Green Bay doesn't try to find more of a I'll use the term lunch pail guy that's willing to get dirty and get in there and make tackles. Yeah, get in there and make tackles. And I mean, Kansas State still a decent football school. It's not Alabama or Georgia or Clemson or anything like that, but it's still a good program. And then he's got really good size there. But then it's funny that you mentioned play to his size, because the first thing I thought to myself is when you have an athlete that's really big and they don't play to that potential, it's just so frustrating. It's kind of like when you see somebody at the mall and they're like, 6'8", and it turns out they never played basketball or something like that. It's just like, what? And not that they have to, but the Packers need to find guys that are willing to play. They need to find football players. I say that all the time. It sounds so simple and easy, but that's what's between the ears. And that's the thing that's important about the combine and these pro days, is not just the measurables and the broad jump, the high jump, the 40-yard dash, but how smart are they? And you think that's one thing I think the Packers have done a great job of, is finding players that are smart. So I'll ask you a question. I know it's your show, but the combine, like, how much do you put it? Do you get kind of sucked into the enamorment of a player because of the combine? Or are you one of those that's like, hey, I still want to watch the film?
I'll be completely honest. I'm more of a guy that wants to watch the film. Now, with that being said, I do pay attention a little bit more to the combine when it comes to certain things.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I'll give you an example. Being from Iowa, and our listeners know this by heart by now, they could probably recite this in their sleep, but I'm a huge Hawkeye fan. Well, obviously, a few years back, it was the Josh Jackson experience.
Mm-hmm.
Well, there for the longest time, oh, well, he's a first-round pick. He's a first-round pick. He's a first-round pick. Yeah, that's great. The guy played great at Iowa. He's a solid player. I'm really happy for him. But let's see what he runs at the combine, because he put it all on tape. But there's still something there about the speed. So let's see what he runs at the combine. He went to the combine, ran a 4.59. That hurts a little bit.
Yeah, right.
So I mean, I still want to watch the tape on things, and I always put in my notes, if the combine hasn't happened, I'll put words like seems like or looks to have, because even though they look like they have the speed on film, are they going to have it when you put them in a situation like the combine? So I don't rely on the combine. I don't give a crap what they bench press. I don't give a crap, if they're, they're running their drills properly. I don't really stick to that. But I do like to look to see what their 40 time is, just because if they look slow on tape, are they going to look slow when they run that 40? Because there's a big difference. If they look slow on tape, but then they go to the combine and run, a 4.3 40, then you got to look at, okay, maybe it was scheme that was keeping him down, or maybe it's technique, something that can be coached to help him reach his speed potential. So to kind of get around your question, yes and no.
Well, listen, I'll tell you something right now. Bench press might not be that big of a deal, but For my punter, I want my punter putting up at least 15 reps, right? I want a John Ryan. Let's bring John Ryan back. Can we? He was like he had that body build physique. He
Yep,
was a
yep,
big,
yep.
really big guy. I mean, I joke. I mean, that stuff is. I'm always just curious how much it impacts the way that when you're looking at these athletes that you really get into it. But I kind of almost look at it maybe in the opposite facet there too, where it's like, okay, you can run a 4.240. Anybody can run a 4.240 in their underwear at the combine.
Right, yeah.
But if you get in the game and you're turned around and your agility isn't there, and you can't use your speed with your agility, and you don't have the makeup speed, or you're constantly having to recover. And listen, Sam Shields was a great cornerback. He could recover from a mistake very quickly and easily, but that's not an easy thing to have. Even some really fast corners don't have recovery speed, which is different than just being able to run fast, right?
Yeah.
So but that's why it's a premium position, because there's so much that gets asked of players at the position that they have to do. And that's why I think for us to focus on this, and it's like, well, who's your guys? It's like, well, it's an interesting position, because I don't want Green Bay to just start taking flyers on late round guys. If you want to get somebody impactful, you got to be thinking about it late day 1 and day 2.
And I guess now thinking about it, there's one other thing I do kind of pay attention to at the combine. Is like I just kind of joked about earlier, the measurables that they put on college websites, like height and weight and that, are always completely different than what they actually are. So I do kind of look, because I know the Packers have a certain threshold with their positions on what they want. So, let's say, Jair was kind of on the small side of what they have for threshold when it comes to height for a cornerback. So I do kind of look at that. He may be listed as 6 foot, but what did he measure at the combine? Because we know that's going to be an official measurement. So, if he looks great, he does all that, but he's 5'9", then it kind of puts it in the back of the head, okay, well, maybe the Packers aren't going to touch him, or, maybe they'll take him, but he has to fall to like the 4th or 5th round before they'll do it. So no, I completely agree. It just, like I said, it's one of those things that if I can see it on the field that they look fast, and then they go to the combine and they put up a fast 40, then that puts it in my mind, okay, it's a legit speed. It's not a false speed, as a quote unquote false speed. So, and I've seen that a lot with other guys too. You look at them and, well, go back to the Iowa thing. One guy that I really like is Riley Moss, but obviously I have the bias to him. He looks fast on field, but are we going to fall into the trap like we did with Josh Jackson? He looks like he can handle it on the field, but is he going to be able to handle it when he gets in the pros? And I think that's where the 40 time kind of helps. Now, what I would love to see, kind of what you were saying, is let's not put them in the workout gear. Let's put them in full pads and have them run the 40 and see what they do there. But that's not going to happen. So
I think that's what the 3 cone is supposed to help kind of, detect. Even though they're not in pads when they run it, I think that's supposed to help detect a little more of their agility and their ability to change directions and things like that. Because some guys can change directions and not lose a beat. You've talked about fluidity a couple of times, and that's a huge thing, transitioning from your back pedal and those kind of things, and not losing a step. And I saw that in some of these guys when I was looking through it, and it's like, that's a problem. When you're transitioning and you're losing half a step, the receivers are only getting faster. Yep. So you're asking, and the problem is the defenders can't do anything anymore. I mean, you can't touch guys, you can't pass interference, all that other kind of stuff. So speed has become so much more of a premium than it ever was, because you can't knock guys around, you can't touch them, you can't do a whole lot of that, or it's going to get called in an offensive NFL.
And that's what's weird about when I say they're physical, or they need to be a little bit more physical, because like you pointed out, they're not going to be able to get away with a lot of that in the pros. But there's one thing that I want to bring up, and then we can start transitioning out, because I don't want to keep you forever. I mean, I could sit here and talk NFL draft and positions until the cows come home, but you were just talking about how receivers are getting faster. And I know we're not really talking about receivers right now, but in a roundabout way, it kind of goes back to my point. We're also seeing receivers get kind of smaller, because if you look at some of the top receivers in the last couple drafts, they were about 6 foot, 185 pounds. Well, you're also kind of seeing that with the cornerbacks now, where they're about 6 foot, 185 pounds. well, we always talk about how we like to see them bigger in the NFL without losing their ability. Should we still be looking at them getting bigger for the NFL? Because it seems like both groups are starting to get smaller than what we're used to, or should we still be looking at, hey, maybe that guy needs to put on 10 pounds, or maybe that guy needs to, pack on a little bit more bulk?
I think guys are always going to need to build their physique to the NFL. That's never going to change. So guys are going to
Okay.
come in from college and they're going to have to put weight on. And that's not just at receiver, DB. It's at any, obviously, if
Right,
you're
yeah.
offensive lineman, defensive lineman, those guys are going to have to learn, like I think Royce Newman came in, he was a little small, had to put some weight on, for
Yeah,
example.
yeah,
I don't think that's ever going to change because the college game is just so much different than the pros. But
yeah.
this goes back to kind of what I was saying before, and it's a very overly simplistic view, but sometimes football, we can get overly into the weeds with it, and it just comes down to you need to have the good players. Just find a good football player. So if you can find a guy, to use your term, like that plays up to their speed or plays above their size. So if you got a guy that's 6 foot, but he can play like a 6'3" and he's got vertical off the charts, like take the guy. If he can make plays and he can defend with the best of them, or you got a corner that can go toe to toe and cover tight ends or something like that, kind of a unicorn, then just draft that player. Just take that player. I mean, it's we've seen so many guys that were really big that played small, a lot of guys that were small that played really big, and all over the place. I mean, Randy Moss was kind of one of a kind. He was very tall, very big, very fast. It's funny you mentioned smaller receivers because we just happen to have one that's like a freak combo, Christian Watson. He's very, very big and he's very fast, which is great because as soon as he realizes, hey, I could jump, he's going to be a problem in, with jet sweeps and running behind the line of scrimmage, the deep ball, obviously, but then like short yardage at the goal line, like he's going to be really tough to defend. You just need to have players that can play up to their potential. So I don't get to, it always frustrates me when teams stick so much within a formula, and I get you have to kind of stay true to what works. And I'm not a GM or a scout,
Right.
but when I hear that, so-and-so wasn't even on this team's board, and okay, maybe they were right. And maybe there's other reasons why that play, maybe there's off-field stuff or whatever where that player wasn't on the board. But I think everybody should be an option when you're trying to build a team. And I think one of the things that the Packers tend to lack when I look at the playoffs specifically is dudes. I'm using the term dudes, right? You got to have dudes on the field, guys that can play, tackle, do all the fundamental stuff. I don't care whether they're 5'11" or they're not 6'1". There's nothing in Brian Gutekunst's contract, as far as I know, that says, hey, if you draft too many players below 6 feet, you're out as GM. So just find the best football. Yeah, you really don't. Yeah, that's true. But just find the best players. I say just find the best players. Don't get
That
too
could
don't
be
get
the
too
Ron
caught
Wolf
up in
writer.
Yeah. Well, Ron Wolf, see, and we miss Ron Wolf for those that grew up with those Packers, because he really, I mean, he brought the swagger, he brought the culture, and he wanted players that did the same thing. And I'm not saying Goody doesn't do that. He was around a little bit when I think at the end of when Wolf was here. He was definitely here during Ted Thompson's time.
Yep.
So there's some holdover. Learn from that though. Find football players and find guys that can get out there and play, because that's what it comes down to. When you look at these teams that are still playing in the Super Bowl, they got dudes. You need dudes.
That's where I kind of wish Eli Wolf would have stuck around here. I understand the whole situation in that, but at least with Eli, Ron was showing up from time to time. I got to meet Ron Wolf a few different times, and he was such a great guy. And I could just imagine him being a great guy, having in the offices saying, hey, we're having this little bit of issue over here. Can you give me some advice on what to do? Because I could just imagine the stuff that he would be able to spout out. But, well, Jason, I don't want to keep you too much longer, but I asked this of a couple other of our guests. No explanation, no nothing, just down and out. If you had to take one of these corners, it doesn't matter if first round, whatever, but one of these guys, and you're going to go into Brian Gutekunst's office and pound the table and swear on Vince Lombardi's soul that this is the guy you need, who are you taking?
Joey Porter Jr. I want that pedigree. I just I'm not even I'm a West Coast guy, but it's Joey Porter Jr. for me all the way. If he's there, I just have too much faith in his ability to turn out to be a dude, like I just said. Perfect timing.
You just became more handsome to me because Joey Porter Dude has been has been my dude for a bit now. So, yeah, like I said, we're going to go ahead and wrap it up here. It was great having you on. Is there anything you want to plug or anything you're working on that's coming up, or where can people check you out at?
Yeah, thanks so much, all. You can find me on Twitter. I'm at Jason Perone. I'm over at GameOn Wisconsin. I do the Quick Slants podcast during the season, and when there's news that comes up in the off season. So if there is a show, it'll be at the GameOn Wisconsin podcast page and on Mondays. And then I also am on Pack a Day every Thursday with Mark Eckel, who used to cover the Eagles for many, many years, is a big Packers fan as well. So every week on Thursdays over at the Pack a Day podcast. Thanks for having me on, man. This was awesome. I appreciate it, and got me excited about the draft. So it's got me reinvigorated after the Packers broke our hearts. What was 4 or 5 weeks ago?
Well, Nick and I had to do something to mend our hearts because we just, for one, we're getting sick of the Rodgers drama, and for two, it just, I keep joking with people, has the Super Bowl already been played? You mean they haven't played it yet? Yeah. So it was great. I loved. I'm so happy that you were able to come on and we were able to get our schedules matched. Hopefully next time we can get Nick involved too, because unfortunately there were some scheduling issues on my end that I messed up. That's what you get when you have an Australian for a co-host.
I think Nick finally realized, he's like, oh, Perone's a B guy. I don't need to be on that show. I got other things to do. I'll let Joe handle that one.
But you've got an open invite to come back at any time, and we appreciate you taking time out to talk with us today.
You bet. So, thanks so much, Joe. Appreciate it.
Thanks for listening, guys. As always, you can find us on Twitter. You can find Jason at Jason Perone, myself at Nicholas GRGR, and Joe at Iowa_Joe86. And of course, the podcast at Outback_Packers. Until next time, we'll see you later.